Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Bree Cheyenne. Here on my channel we talk about all things inexplicably interesting, mysterious, and things that are just downright creepy enough to keep you up at night. So if that's what you like, then hopefully you enjoy this video. And if you're new to my channel, which you probably are at this point, then you'll soon come to find out that I like short and sweet intros, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into the video. Today's video is going to be about the disappearance and murder of a young girl by the name of Maria Ridulph. Now this was a cold case, but then it was solved and then it was unsolved, so it's currently still a cold case actually. We're gonna get into how all of that happened. Before we do that though, of course we always start with some background. So a little bit of background about Maria Ridulph. She was born on March 12, 1950 by the parents of Michael and Frances Ivy Ridulph. She was born in Sycamore, Illinois. She also had two sisters and one brother, and she was the youngest of the four siblings. Despite the fact that at this time, a lot of the people in Sycamore either worked or lived on farms, Michael actually worked at one of the few factories that was in Sycamore, while Frances kept up the home. At the time of her disappearance, Maria was only in second grade. Even then, though, she was an honor student. She had also received multiple awards for her perfect attendance at Sunday school at her church by the name of Evangelical Lutheran Church of St. John. Despite all of this, though, Frances described Maria as extremely high-strung. In an interview in 1957, Frances gave shortly after Maria disappeared, she said, Maria was also described as a child that was a screamer and was afraid of the dark. She had a best friend by the name of Sigman who was 8 years old, and she lived on the same street as Maria. I don't know if I said this by the way, but I am so sorry if you hear this fan going. It's a winter day that's like really hot, and usually I am all about the heater, but it's like super hot today, so I got the fan out and I look like I'm like trying to be a supermodel right now. I'm just hot. I'm just hot as hell. Literally. Ew. Back to the story. On December 3rd, 1957, one evening, Maria wanted to go out because it was starting to snow. After dinner, Maria and her best friend Kathy went out just as the sun had started to set to go out to play a game they called Duck the Cars, which consisted of them running back and forth trying to dodge the headlights of oncoming cars in the street. As they were playing this game, and everything I'm about to say is all based on testimony that Kathy gave, she was the only witness. So at this time that they're playing Duck the Cars, Kathy says that she and Maria were approached by a man. She described this man, who gave them the name Johnny, as someone who was in his 20s, tall with a slender chin, light hair, and a gap. She also said he was wearing a colorful sweater. Johnny told the girls that he was 24 years old and that he wasn't married at the time. He then proceeded to ask the girls if they liked dolls and piggyback rides. Upon asking that, he gives Maria a piggyback ride. And when he finishes giving Maria the piggyback ride, she goes to her house because she wanted to get a doll to show Johnny. When Maria returned with the doll, Catherine decided that she wanted to go back to her house to get her mittens. So when she went to go get her mittens and came back, she discovered that Maria nor Johnny were there anymore. At this time, Kathy went to the Ridulph house to alert her parents that she couldn't find Maria. Maria's family initially thought that Maria might just be hiding, so they sent out their 11-year-old son to look for Maria. However, when Maria's 11-year-old brother couldn't find her, that's when they got worried and called the police. Within an hour, not only police, but also armed civilians were all searching for Maria. Despite their efforts, they couldn't locate Maria or Johnny. Within 2 days of the abduction, the FBI had touched down in Sycamore, just in case the kidnapping did cross state lines, because at that time it would be considered a federal crime. Investigators had questioned numerous people who had seen the girls playing with no one but each other between 6 and 6:30 p.m. They also spoke to family members who had seen Kathy and Maria between the time that Maria went to get her doll, Kathy went to get her mittens, and then when Kathy went to report Maria's disappearance to the family. Based off of the interviews that they did, they concluded that Johnny approached the girls no later than 6:30 and that Maria was abducted between 6:45 and 7 p.m. Since Kathy was the only witness to see this Johnny man, the FBI and local police were worried that he might come back to kidnap and harm her as well, and because of this, they placed Kathy in protective custody. While she was in protective custody, the authorities had her look at a photo array of convicted felons and possible suspects that could be Johnny. In the lineup was a man named John Tessier. John Tessier lived in the girls' neighborhood. However, police failed to have Kathy identify John as Johnny, and John also had an alibi for the night of the murder. In December of 1957, Kathy was taken to the Dane County Sheriff's Office in Madison, Wisconsin. She was taken there to look at a lineup of possible suspects. Out of the suspects, she identified a man by the name of Thomas Rivard. FBI documents describe Rivard as a 35-year-old man, approximately 156 pounds, 5 foot 4 inches, with dark blonde bushy hair. Now, police didn't actually suspect him of the crime. In fact, he had a pretty solid alibi. He was in jail. The police definitely knew where he was, and he definitely was not committing the crime. So, again, they didn't actually think it was him. He was there to merely fill in the lineup. John Tessier, was who they were actually looking at. Rivard also did not physically resemble Tessier at all. Tessier was 6 inches taller than him, and he was also 15 years younger than him. When asked years later about the lineup, Kathy says she does not remember identifying Rivard as the suspect. Maria's disappearance ended up garnering a lot of national coverage and actually even took the interest of President Dwight D. Eisenhower and the FBI director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover. Law enforcement continued to investigate many possible suspects, including transients, sex workers, and even a local man who used to give piggyback rides to kids. Unfortunately, though, they were never able to develop any solid leads. After her disappearance, Maria's parents appeared on TV and other media numerous times begging for their daughter's safe return, as well as the public's assistance and any help that they could provide. So a tragic day struck on April 6, 1958, near Woodbine, Illinois, which is approximately 100 miles away from Sycamore. Two tourists who were looking for mushrooms along U.S. Route 20 discovered the skeletal remains of a small child in a wooded area. The decomposition of the body had indicated that it had been there for at least several months. Based on dental records, a lock of hair, as well as the socks and shoes Maria was seen at the time of her disappearance, the remains were identified as Maria Ridulph. The rest of Maria's things were not found with her body. The coroner at the time refused to take photos of the body because he didn't want the photos of a child's body, especially in that condition, getting leaked on media sites, which I think was the most respectable thing to do. When her body was found, the FBI then withdrew from the case because they then knew that the crime didn't cross state lines. When an initial autopsy was done, they couldn't determine a cause of death. However, 50 years later, when the case was reopened, the cause of death was determined to be multiple stab wounds to the neck. John Tessier was born on November 27, 1939, to a British Sergeant General by the name of Samuel Cherry and his wife Eileen McCullough Cherry. In an unfortunate turn of events, Samuel was killed early on in World War II, and Eileen had served as one of the first female airplane spotters with the UK's Royal Air Force. At the time, she met a man named Ralph Tessier who was serving in the United States Air Force. She ended up marrying Ralph in November of 1944, and she and John, then age 7, ended up following Ralph to Sycamore, Illinois. The couple settled down, and over the years they had 6 more kids, and John ended up even taking Ralph's last name, Tessier. The Tessier family was actually located right around the corner from the Ridulph family, less than 2 blocks away. John's father, Ralph, was rather friendly with the police too, actually. He was a sign painter and had painted many logos on the Sycamore police cars and their doors or something like that too, I think, and was even friendly with the police chief. When he was in 10th grade, John was expelled for pushing a teacher and calling her out of her name, which will be important, slightly important, it's not that important, but a little important later on. At the time of Maria's disappearance, he was 18 years old, living with his parents and his siblings, planning to enlist in the United States Air Force. On December 4th, 1957, which was one day after Maria's disappearance, investigators did stop by the Tessier home just as part of their normal investigation to try to find Maria. On that day, Tessier's two older sisters, Catherine and Jean, had said that their mother told the investigators that John had been home all night on December 3rd. However, they later testified that that was not true. Before the body was even found, the FBI did investigate John. Now, it's unclear, the sources vary as to how he became a suspect originally. It's debated between either a tip or John's parents just took him in themselves to prove that he was innocent. Both John and his parents told the FBI that on December 3rd, he was 40 miles away in Rockford, Illinois, enlisting in the Air Force. Now, this story differed from his mother's original story that stated that he had been home all night on December 3rd. However, he said that he had been in Chicago on December 2nd and 3rd, undergoing physical examinations that were required for his enlistment. On the morning of December 3rd, he visited a Chicago recruiting station, which was corroborated by records as well, by the way, and then he spent the rest of the day in Chicago sightseeing. He then returned to Rockford by train, and he arrived there by at least 6:45 p.m. At this time, he had called his parents because he needed a ride home because he left his car back at home. Telephone records that were discovered later did show that a call was made from Rockford to the Tessier home at 6:57 p.m. and the operator wrote down that it came from a man by the name of John Tessier. Close enough, but he spelled his name a little wrong apparently. After he made the call to his parents, he had met with some recruiting officers to drop off some paperwork that were needed for his recruitment. It was confirmed by the officers that they did speak to John around 7:15 p.m. that evening, although some officers did question his credibility and conduct. John was brought to the police station to take a lie detector, which he ended up passing. After that, he was cleared as a suspect on December 10th, and they noted that this suspect did not need any further investigation. After he was cleared, John ended up leaving that very next day to begin his training for the Air Force. He ended up serving in the military for many years. He even rose to the rank of captain, but after his service in the military, he became a police officer in 1974. While he was a police officer in 1982, he took in a 15-year-old runaway and her friend as well, who knew he was a police officer. The girl then alleged that John had molested her, so he was charged with statutory rape, which was a felony, and he pled guilty to communication to a minor for immoral purposes, which is a misdemeanor. He legally changed his name to Jack Daniel McCullough in 1994. In 1994, at the time the case is 40 years old, the Sycamore Police Lieutenant Patrick Soler had closed the case by stating that a man by the name of William Redman was the culprit for the abduction and murder of Maria. Redman was a former truck driver and a carnival worker as well who passed away in 1992. Now, he did have some sketchy things going on surrounding him. He was charged in 1988 with a 1951-year-old murder of an 8-year-old girl in Pennsylvania. However, that case was dismissed when the police officer refused to give the name of the confidential informant. He was also suspected in another disappearance of a 10-year-old girl in Ohio. According to Soler, Redman had told another inmate about a crime he had committed that was similar to the Ridulph kidnapping and murder. Soler also believed that the demeanor of Redman was similar to that of Johnny. This theory was criticized due to lack of physical evidence to support this, and he himself actually even admitted to the lack of evidence, really. He called the case closed but not solved, meaning that it's still open to other possibilities of other suspects, and he even said himself that it would be hard to prove if Redman was still alive unless Redman were to confess. The case went unsolved for many years up until 2008 when it was reopened based off of some new information. Eileen, on her deathbed in January of 1994, supposedly said, Janet took that to mean that Jack was the one that kidnapped and killed Maria. Mary, another sister of Jack, was also present at the time that Eileen supposedly said this. She says all she heard Eileen say was that he did it. But she did testify that she had the same understanding that Janet did. The older sisters had also always suspected Jack of the murder for years. It was noted that Eileen was a cancer patient at the time and she was doped up on morphine, and her doctor did describe her as disoriented. So take that how you want. Jack also allegedly threatened to kill his sister Janet one time, also allegedly sexually molested his younger sister Jean when she was a minor. By the time of Eileen's death, he was completely estranged from the family, and they even told him not to come to the funeral. Over the next 14 years after Eileen's death, Janet had made multiple attempts to get law enforcement to look into Jack as the perpetrator for the crime, but no one was really listening to her. Patrick Solar told CNN that he had never spoken to Janet. However, he did not suspect that Jack could have committed the crime because he knew the Tessier family. And he also brought up the fact that he was cleared for the crime back in 1957. But Janet was not giving up. In 2008, she had emailed an Illinois State Police tip line about Jack. Because of this, a cold case unit had actually decided to start looking into Jack and his whereabouts and his alibi for the night of the disappearance. Catherine and Jean had teamed up with Janet and told investigators about their suspicions about Jack. Jean had also told them that he sexually molested not only her but also multiple other young girls. Another young girl said that one time Jack gave her a piggyback ride and he wouldn't even put her down until her father had to intervene. The cold case unit ended up reviewing the evidence, and they developed a new timeline as to how Jack could have made the call, gotten to Rockford to make the call by 6:57, and also met with recruiters by 7:15 p.m. However, with their new timeline, Maria could not have been kidnapped any later than 6:20. They did know that the police search was underway by at least 7 because Catherine, who had come home from a party at 7, had already discovered that the search was in progress. In another attempt to get Kathy to identify John in the lineup, police ended up taking 5 photos from the 1957 Sycamore High School yearbook. Jack's picture was not in the yearbook for that year because he was expelled, like I mentioned earlier. So police had to obtain their own photo to use in the lineup, which they got from his former girlfriend. But there were some slight differences between the yearbook pictures and the one they got from the former girlfriend. In the picture they got from the girlfriend, Jack was wearing an open collar as opposed to a tie like the yearbooks, and the background was also dark as opposed to light. Now in this lineup, Kathy identified Jack as the perpetrator. Jack's former girlfriend not only provided them with the photo, but she also gave them an unused military-issued train ticket from Rockford to Chicago that was dated for December of 1957. Because of this, investigators suggested that Jack actually drove his car to Chicago instead of taking the train. If he did that, then he could have driven back to Sycamore on December 3rd and kidnapped Maria and made it back to Rockford in time to make the call. Coincidentally enough, when I read this, I was like, that's a big coincidence. They located a high school friend who said they distinctly remember seeing Jack's car in Sycamore that evening that Maria disappeared, and he also said that Jack never let anyone else drive his car. In July of 2011, the Seattle Police Department brought Jack in for questioning. They used a professional interrogator because of his law enforcement background. Jack initially was pretty calm and answered all their questions, but he became evasive and aggressive when they started asking him about Maria's disappearance and where he was. He refused to answer any more questions relating to Maria Ridulph. He was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Maria Ridulph and extradited back to Illinois where the crime occurred. That same month, Maria's body was exhumed to check for DNA evidence, but they didn't find any. This was the autopsy now, where the forensic anthropologist was able to determine a likely cause of death, and the forensic anthropologist determined that she was stabbed in the neck a few times and that could have been a cause of death. However, an appellate court did later state that the findings did not dismiss other possibilities of cause of death, as the body was too decomp to tell. Clay Campbell, who became the lead prosecutor on the case, was at first pretty reluctant to take it because of its age and also the lack of physical evidence. But he was kind of pressured into it by both the Ridulph and the Tessier family, and so he took the case. The trial begins in September of 2012. The prosecution's argument was that John ended up taking Maria because he was attracted to her, but instead of kidnapping her, he ended up killing her. The prosecution suspected that Jack might have molested Maria, but they didn't have any evidence to actually support this, so this was never brought up in court. Numerous witnesses testified for the prosecution, including Kathy, who identified Jack as Johnny. Another childhood friend also testified that Jack had given her a piggyback ride under the guise of the name Johnny. Even 3 inmates testified about Jack talking about killing Maria. Only thing about that was that their stories were inconsistent and it didn't match up with the evidence that included stabbing. Their cause of death were like all very different, but again, like I said, other possible causes of death weren't ruled out. The defense's argument was basically that the prosecution was simply pushed and pressured into doing this trial by the Tessier and the Ridulph family, as the physical evidence didn't support that Jack committed the crime, nor did they have any proof that Jack was actually in Sycamore at the time of the kidnapping. Jack did not testify as per the advice of his attorneys, which was smart. On September 14th, 2012, Jack was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Maria Ridulph. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. He was 73 at the time. Of course, Jack appealed his convictions. On February 13th, 2015, an Illinois appellate court upheld the murder conviction, but they dismissed the conviction for the kidnapping and abduction as it was outside of the statute for that. But this had no effect on the life sentence. However, they did rule that Eileen's statement should not have been admissible. They declined to overturn the conviction because the judge's decision was not greatly influenced by her statement. So Jack, now acting pro se, filed a motion to have his murder conviction set aside as well. Initially, the motions were dismissed as frivolous and without merit. Jack's original attorney, his public defender from his original trial, asked the court to reconsider their dismissal. Jack was able to file a successive motion that could not be denied without hearing from the state attorney's office first. In response to the motions, the new county state attorney, Richard Smack, who replaced Clay Campbell, decided to conduct his own review of the evidence. He concluded that Jack could not have committed the crime and that he was actually innocent. He alleged that evidence was kept out of the trial that clearly established Jack's whereabouts on the evening of the disappearance. Also, phone records showed that Jack made a collect call from downtown Rockford, not Sycamore, like they claimed in the trial. Combining the timing of the phone call, the 40-mile distance, and the conditions of the road at the time, Schmack concluded that Jack could not have possibly made it back in time to kidnap Maria. After a March 2016 court hearing, a judge vacated Jack's original conviction and sentence and ordered a new trial on April 15, 2016. Jack was released on bail pending a new trial. However, a week later, the judge dismissed the charges against him completely. He did dismiss them without prejudice though, meaning that a prosecutor could try him again if they so wished. A petition was also started to replace Smack with a special prosecutor. It was started by the Tessier family, the Ridulph family, all of them. And initially the judge had postponed the ruling, but after that he denied the ruling and no special prosecutor was ever appointed. Jack was officially declared innocent on April 12, 2017, and the case since then has officially been reopened, so it is now a cold case again. That was crazy, you guys. I feel like I'm really low energy, but hopefully that didn't like bore you guys by the way I was talking. I feel like I had to like look down at that paper a lot. I don't know, my brain was just not working today. I don't know what's going on, but anyways, if you liked that video, great, good, I'm glad. I hope to see you back for another one. We like short outros as well. This is Bree Cheyenne checking out. Bye.